Welcome back to The Heat. We're discussing the implementation of the Iran nuclear deal and the lifting of international sanctions. Let's get back to our eminent panel. And Flynt, let me start with you this time. One criticism against Iran is that the US and other negotiators in this deal had to deal with two Irans, one led by President Rouhani, and the other faction, I would say, within Iran would be what's described as the hardline religious establishment. Was that the case?
You know, I think that line of criticism or line of commentary is very common in the United States and the West more generally, but I think it's very much overblown, especially on important issues of foreign policy and national security like this nuclear deal. I mean, I don't want in any way to sell short Dr. Zarif's wonderful abilities as a diplomat. I don't want to sell short President Rouhani's commitment to getting this nuclear deal done. But in the end, if there hadn't been a consensus among major power centers in the Iranian political system, including Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader, this deal wouldn't have happened. I think that Iran has had a fairly consistent position on nuclear diplomacy with the United States. It wasn't going to give up what it saw as its sovereign right, recognized in the Non-Proliferation Treaty, to do uranium enrichment under safeguards. Once the United States accepted that reality and that principle, it then became possible to negotiate the details of a nuclear deal like the one that's now being implemented. But I think that in the end, this is something that Americans will have to get over if they really want to build a different sort of relationship with Iran. You're not going to be able to find, you know, good Iranians that we think will do what we want them to do and somehow work with them to the exclusion of other parts of the system. It is a system, and we're going to need to learn to deal with the Islamic Republic as a system on the nuclear issue, on other important issues where, as I said, I think America's interests require us to develop a genuinely strategic relationship with Iran.
Dr. Marandi, how significant is the nuclear deal for Iran's broader relationship with the West? Is this a major turning point? Is this the beginning of something new, or are we perhaps reading a little bit too much into this?
No, I think it is important. I think it provides an opportunity, although the fact that the Americans imposed sanctions, new sanctions, immediately after the deal did not go down well at all in Iran, and it was, I think, a public diplomacy disaster for the Americans. But still, it is an opportunity, and we have to see, though, how it plays out in the coming months. Are the Americans going to, again, try to increase sanctions time after time, or in the coming months? That may change things. But I think this is significant, but it comes also at a very important moment, which is probably, in a way, even more important than the nuclear deal itself. The fact that Saudi Arabia is now becoming something of a negative force in the eyes of the international community. Wahhabism is now being criticized. Even the media in the United States is criticizing Saudi Arabia nowadays, which is something that we would never have seen before. Ever since especially the Europeans came face to face with the results of their policy in Syria, and we had over 1 million people as refugees going to Europe, there has been a major shift in the way in which Europe is now viewing the situation in Syria and Iraq and perhaps even Yemen. This is, I think, putting these two together gives us a better understanding about how things may turn out to be in the coming years. Iran's relationship with Russia has evolved dramatically. Iran's relationship with China is improving also rapidly. But also European public opinion and even politicians have changed their language when it comes to Iran and Saudi Arabia. The United States, I think the political establishment is still showing a great deal of hostility, but even, as I said, major newspapers and media outlets are now criticizing Saudi Arabia. So we are entering a very different phase, but it's still too early to to understand what will happen in the coming months and years.
All right, Peter, Dr. Marandi mentioned there that there still is hostility on the part of the political establishment, as you call it here in the United States. Can this deal still be scuttled, perhaps, by elements in the U.S. Congress? And can the United States do anything, or people in the United States do anything to block it?
There are elements who tried to scuttle it already, or at least to scuttle the improving relationship when the American sailors were picked up by Iranian authorities. The immediate response, again, from the Republicans, the conservatives, was that this is an outrage. There are people here in the United States and in Israel who would love to provoke a confrontation. I think that the Obama administration at this point is very much committed to making this happen, but there are others who would try to find an opening to sabotage these relations. You have to remember there have been times when the U.S. and Iran almost did come to different kind of understanding. In 2003, after 9/11 and after the beginnings of the hostilities in the region, Iran reached out to the United States and offered a grand bargain to the United States where they would recognize Israel, where they would limit Hamas and Hezbollah's activities in the area. They wanted to be treated as a normal state. They wanted to be allowed to have peaceful development of nuclear power. But the Bush administration turned down. It was a terrible strategic blunder. It was the best deal that Iran has ever offered the United States. But the hawks within the Bush administration preferred war and confrontation with Iran over a settlement. So there have been elements for years in Iran who looked for a better relationship with the United States. But then in both countries, or some in Iran, and certainly in the United States, there are people who want to prevent that. And the Israelis have been on the side of the hawks in the United States who want a confrontational policy. But I think at this point, the United States and the Obama administration wants to move forward. The forces of the world, as Professor Marandi was saying, are realigning in a way that should create a much better climate for positive relationships between the United States and Iran and China and Russia, and forcing the Saudis to rethink their positions.
Right, Ali, this is a very dynamic situation, isn't it? Relationships are changing all the time in the Middle East. At least we get it. This is not solely a deal between the United States and Iran. There are other parties involved, the permanent members of the UN Security Council, plus Germany as well. And it seems that there's the sentiment in those other countries, they want a better relationship with Iran.
Yes, I think everybody does. You know, the U.S. has lost so much in the past 40 years because of its inconsistent foreign policy. People talk about Iran and camps. The United States has those the same things, where the president is trying to do something and the Congress and other power centers try to you know, undermine him. In fact, it's my suspicion that these two American boats going into Iranian territories were sent intentionally on the day of the State of the Union to undermine and undercut the president. So I hope there will be an investigation of why two boats, not one, made their way to Iranian territories and they were captured by the Iranians. I think there is still in this country, even invisible powers who want to have their own foreign policy or domestic policy in spite of what the president wants. The United States has lost a lot of money because of these stupid sanctions against countries from Cuba to Iran to other countries. And you know, the amount of money that fled the United States because of fear that they would be arrested or charged with something is enormous. Nobody has calculated it, but from personal experience, I can tell you it's in the hundreds of billions of dollars because of sort of such reactionary policies by the U.S. government that has really amounted to nothing in terms of interest to the United States security and stability.
Flynt, we had the German foreign minister who's hailed this deal, and he says it gives us hope that other crises in the region can be resolved. And on that particular issue, let's listen to what President Rouhani had to say. Let's watch.
We seek to rationally solve regional problems. But meanwhile, our government and people will never accept wrong and undiplomatic actions. If it is necessary, we will give a strong response. We hope the Saudi authorities can learn lessons from what has happened and take actions that will benefit both its own and regional interests.
So, Flynt, how do you see Iran's role changing in resolving those issues, the violence in Syria or in Iraq for that matter?
You know, the reality is that the United States and its traditional Western partners can't do serious conflict resolution in Syria without engaging Iran and without eliciting Iran's cooperation in a serious way that takes Iranian perspectives into account. You can't do serious conflict resolution in Yemen without that. You can't deal with a whole host of pressing challenges in the Middle East unless the United States takes this nuclear deal as an opening and begins to engage Iran on these other strategic challenges, in a genuinely strategic way. That's the real challenge for the Obama administration in its last year in office, and it will be the challenge for whoever succeeds President Obama a little over a year from now.
Right.
The United States can't accomplish these things without that. I think Iran is ready to play the kind of role that President Rouhani referred to, but Iran is going to need to be engaged in a strategic and serious way.
Peter, how has the political landscape in the Middle East changed with this deal?
We don't know yet, but potentially it could be a dramatic change. If the U.S. and Iran begin to work together in a positive way, recognizing each other's interests, recognizing the differences, but looking for a different kind of collaboration, we can see, as Flynt was saying, the situation in Yemen get resolved, hopefully. We can see the situation in Syria move forward. The United States can't solve these problems by itself. That's been very, very clear. The United States needs allies, and those allies require compromises. It requires us recognizing their interests. Iran has interests, Russia has interests, the Bashar Assad regime has interests, but we've got to move towards settling these things because we've got some serious problems. ISIS is a problem for all of us. It's the Iranians more than any other country in the region who recognizes the threat that ISIS poses, and so we can work together to solve some of those problems.
Okay, that's where we're going to have to leave it. Gentlemen, thanks to all of you for joining us.